Somebody can bleed out in as little as a few minutes. The amount of time for first responders to get to the scene of an incident, urban areas, it's 7 to 10 minutes. In suburban areas, it's 12 to 15 minutes. In rural areas, it could be a half an hour, 45 minutes, or sometimes they're not coming.
You're listening to DisasterClass Podcast by Instinct Ready Emergency Management. The sun's out, the weather is nice, but that means so is the sun and the bugs. Don't go anywhere without having your Sawyer bug spray and sunscreen. Keeps you safe, keeps you outdoors. Visit Sawyer.com to find a retailer near you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to DisasterClass, the podcast that's dedicated to helping educate, prepare, and equip you for life's disruptions. I'm Jason Perez.
And I am Wesley Long.
And Wesley, you know what the bell means.
Yes, class is now in session.
Class is in session. And Wesley.
Yes, sir.
It is May.
Yes, it is.
Springtime, nicer weather, but May also is about something else too. In fact, May is Stop the Bleed month.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've talked about Stop the Bleed many times on this podcast.
And we will again.
And this episode, and then there's going to be a nice little bonus episode this month, both about Stop the Bleed. So now the month of May is like I said, is designated as Stop the Bleed month, but then May 22nd, so Thursday, May 22nd is also designated as Stop the Bleed Day. And it actually corresponds to National EMS Week.
Yes, it does.
As you know, that's kind of special for us.
Very special for us. Absolutely.
EMS providers. So,
yeah.
So what are we going to talk about specifically on this episode, Wes?
Well, we wanted to take the opportunity to kind of dedicate a couple of episodes specifically to this topic because it's near and dear to our hearts. It's extremely valuable. It's extremely important. And we're going to talk about some of those things, but specifically what we're going to talk about is what is Stop the Bleed as a project, as a thing, right? How did it start? Where did it come from? And then most importantly, why each and every one of us should consider being trained so that the more people that have this training, the better. And we'll see how valuable that will be throughout the episode.
Yeah. Now, recently, you and Pappy got to speak with Patrick O'Neill of the Stop the Bleed Coalition. And he told us a lot more about what this program is and answer some of those questions for us. So let's dive into, well, what is it? Where did it come from? What's the origin story?
I'm Patrick O'Neill. And before I get into the coalition, it might make sense to just provide a little bit of context for the coalition itself.
Yeah.
So Stop the Bleed is a official program of the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense has contracted with the Stop the Bleed Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization that was formed specifically to support and scale the campaign. And so I lead a team of people that does the work to support and scale the campaign. The mission itself is to save lives, but the explanation that lies behind that goes all the way back to 2002, 2003 timeframe. At that time, DoD was looking at how soldiers were dying on the battlefield. And the study that they performed indicated that roughly 80% of them were dying from blood loss. It actually caused a change in military doctrine. Now, I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I was on active duty in the 1980s. And what I was trained to do on the battlefield was that if a fellow soldier was wounded, I was to yell for the medic, the 911 battlefield cry, and then continue with the mission.
Right.
So that doctrine changed so that soldiers were trained to do what we today call Stop the Bleed, so that they could help their fellow soldier. All those battlefield deaths as a result of blood loss basically meant that the medic was not getting to people in time. And you can think of, multiple casualty, multiple wound incidents. And so soldiers, regular soldiers, were the only people that could potentially help their fellow soldiers. So they were trained in how to stop the bleed. They were equipped with tourniquets and hemostatic dressings. And the result of all that was that the rate of battlefield death from blood loss dropped from 80% to under 20%. And the key takeaway from that is that it proved that people who didn't have any prior emergency services training, medical training, could learn what to do in a fairly short period of time, and importantly, remember what to do in a very high stress environment. That led to discussions at the federal level about forming this public health campaign, really with that simple idea. How do we empower members of the public to do what those regular soldiers learned how to do? Because here in the United States, there's around 40,000 people that die each year from blood loss.
Yeah, that's really good. A lot of good information there. It's amazing to take that stat of 80% of the trauma-related deaths going down to under 20% just by getting some training that everyone is able to do and everyone is able to perform at any time. Having, instead of one medic helping a bunch of people, essentially having a team full of medics helping each other just makes a whole lot of sense when you have those resources readily available there for everyday use, as it's translated to us today.
Yeah. And as with many advances in medicine, a lot of these advances come from the battlefield.
Mhm.
Performing these studies, looking at evidence-based medicine, leads to these advances in medical techniques and
Yep.
and strategies to be able to help, increase better patient outcomes. And so specifically, he's talking about using a tourniquet, which even in, I only did EMS for a little over 12 years. And just even in that short time, I remember when I first started EMS, right? Tourniquets were like bad. Like
Yes,
everyone
don't use
kind of,
them. Yep,
everyone was
they were
afraid of,
taboo.
they're kind
Hmm.
of this taboo subject. And so,
Yep,
but now that you have these studies that have analyzed some of these situations, and now they're proven to be effective,
very
uh,
effective.
uh, reducing blood loss and saving lives. So,
Yep.
um, pretty awesome. And,
Yeah,
yeah,
very, very big. So it's interesting when we talk about that. So that's a great understanding of the origin story, where it came from, why it was valuable in that setting, in that location. But now we want to start talking about it in our everyday use, right? So the question is, okay, great, on the battlefield, on active duty, sure, maybe it's valuable, but does that really translate to our everyday lives when we're not on a battlefield? So now what we're going to talk about is what some of the top bleeding causes actually are when it comes to the 40,000 number that he mentioned at the end of that clip.
People tend to think about shootings, but actually the number one reason is car accidents.
Right.
Yeah.
Shootings, of course, but workplace accidents, playground accidents, various kinds of mishaps where somebody winds up bleeding from an artery and therefore, at risk of losing their life. While it is true that a lot of people are attracted to what the campaign is designed to do, thinking about the risk of shootings, but shootings don't make the top 5 list. Number 1 is car accidents.
Car accidents.
Home accidents, workplace accidents fill kind of number 2, number 3.
Yeah, really cool. I love how it's really important for us, the low hanging fruit. A lot of times we talk about these horrific events is active shooter, and it gets a lot of the news coverage, news cycle. It gets covered, and of course our hearts go out to anyone involved in those things. And when it involves schools and kids, it is absolutely a tragic event. But we're not saying go out and get trained and stop the bleed because active shooter is happening everywhere. That's simply not the case. But these other things that website shows, and I pulled up the website real quick, and they're the 8 things it talks about on the road, at work, during sporting activities, at events. Yeah, a lot of that might be the active shooter kind of thing. But then during natural disasters, at home, on the playground, and on vacation. So those are the 8 places where that 40,000 that number of 40,000 people per year in the United States that are dying through traumatic injuries and blood loss, a lot of that is preventable. It is literally everywhere around us all the time.
Yeah, huge. And so because of that, right, we're not on the battlefield, right? We're here
Mm-mm.
just living
Yep.
life, and these things can happen.
Yep.
And so now, and then he talked about that shift, right? So from in the battlefield, right, they had the medic, and that was his job, was just to take care of that. And then everyone else was just worried about whatever else they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that mentality can be dangerous even in a civilian setting, right? If you're just at home at work, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll call 911. That's their job.
Right.
Well, that's not a
Right.
realistic mindset to have. And for the simple fact is that it takes time for help to arrive, and then you might be the help that is there until they come.
Somebody can bleed out, depending on where their arterial wound is, they can bleed out in as little as a few minutes.
Yep.
And depending on where you are, the amount of time for first responders to get to the scene of an incident, car accident, or what have you, varies quite a bit. But the national standards in urban areas, it's 7 to 10 minutes. In suburban areas, it's 12 to 15 minutes. In rural areas, it could be a half an hour, 45 minutes, or sometimes they're not coming.
So Wesley, we've often talked about 911 times, right? Especially as working in EMS, we know,
and as a dispatcher,
right? We know what response times look like.
fully aware.
And often we do talk about that 7 to 10 minutes as like kind of like that national standard, but he and I love how he put it into context, right? That's an urban environment, right? That's maybe that's in a bigger city with a
Best
lot of
case scenario,
resources, right? And what do you always like to say, Wes?
Yeah, the blue sky days.
That's on a blue sky day.
Yeah.
Right? That's without anything else happening.
Correct.
Right. But now factor in, okay, maybe you live in a suburbia or in a rural area where it can take 30 minutes or more for an ambulance to get there. And someone can bleed out in how little, in those little few minutes.
Yeah.
So I always like to say, do the math. It doesn't add up. And so really, you might be someone's only option. You might even be yourself, your only option.
Correct.
To be able to render life-saving treatment until help arrives.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the cool things, Pappy, man, it was a great little call out in this interview. He had some personal experience from where he lived, right? And I don't think his story is that unique. It's not extremely unique based on where he lived, but he talks about the response times in a rural area, and I was blown away.
See, I grew up in the Northwest in a logging family, and you have an accident up in the woods on a logging site, 9 times out of 10 it's a helicopter. It might be where we lived. Coast Guard could be coming in, sheriff's department, whoever might be, that helicopter coming in, and that could be, like you said, 35, 40 minutes, an hour, based on where you're at, where the resource is. Fishing boats, commercial fishing boats, same thing. That response time can really get out there, if, like you mentioned, if at all.
So huge, right?
It's real though, right?
It's very real, very realistic. And one thing that Pappy's story reminded me of was, most of my EMS career, I worked in New York City, but for a while I did work in kind of upstate New York. And so there were times where, we had to call for the helicopter, because the closest trauma center was 30, 40 minutes away.
Yeah.
And so you had to call the helicopter. But here's another caveat, right? Blue sky days. Well, when weather gets bad, guess what?
They don't fly.
They don't fly.
They don't fly. It's not an option.
It's not an option, right? It's just the risks are too high to be able to risk the flight and then operational. So it's just so we don't always have these. Sometimes we have these perfect scenarios in our head, but it's not realistic.
Right.
Now, to kind of go along with this, right? Because you know, like we've said already, when we think stop the bleed, we think gunshots, stabbings, right? And as we've already discussed, that's not doesn't even make really the top 5, right? The shootings. It could just be these everyday little mishaps that lead into severe bleeding. And Patrick actually had a really a personal powerful personal story that really emphasizes this point.
Your life.
You know, I grew up in Northwest New Jersey that was and still remains, you know, fairly rural. And I have a younger brother who was chasing me, as he often did.
As younger brothers do.
I closed the door behind me as we were running around, and he went to catch the door before the latch caught, and the latch caught first, and he put his hands right through the glass. And that wasn't the problem. The problem was when he pulled his hands back, he slit both of his wrists. And, you know, as a responsible older brother, seeing him bleeding like that, what I said to him was, I'm telling Mom you broke the window.
There you go.
True
Thanks,
story.
big brother.
Yeah, I was
thanks,
11,
big brother.
he might have been 10. But my mother, who was a registered nurse, who was nearby and heard the glass break, knew exactly what to do. Right. And that was not wait for first responders, because we were in an area where there was really nobody available to come anytime soon. So she kind of wrapped him up. And I still remember we had a friend who was over who had a convertible car. And so I see the car driving away by our friend with my dad in the back holding my brother's arms up like he's a piece of meat, all wrapped around both of his wrists to get to the hospital. That was a 25-minute ride away. He made it happily, but
thank heavens.
That's an example of a kind of random accident, you know, just kids playing.
Right.
Something happens.
Yeah. What a great experience, right? Because a lot of times, again, and we're not trying to harp on this, but we think of active shooter, we think of victims, right? Here, there isn't a victim. It's just two kids playing. That's every day. Like, I grew up with two brothers, an older and a younger. We got into all kinds of stuff, always, right? You know, we didn't necessarily go through glass, but I mean, there's sheetrock that, anyway, it happens because life happens. And this is a consequence of life. Stuff happens, right? So again, the goal is just have people everywhere with the mental preparation to help, the education to do so when called upon, and then the tools to manage those situations. Now, Patrick was very fortunate. His mother happened to be, there was a couple things that just worked out perfectly for them. His mother was a trained RN. Huge. Awesome. She's got the knowledge. She had some stuff at the house to help. She happened to be home at the time. Right. She happened to be there. She happened to hear the glass break and probably was already moving towards there with a vision of what to do in a very calm demeanor. You know, we thank our nurses for what they do every single day. They have to manage these kinds of things. Like, perfect scenario for them. You take any of those scenarios, those components out, and that story could end in a very different way. And it can be very, very scary.
Right. So really the question that we leave all of our listeners with is, if something happens, whatever it is, are you prepared and ready to act and to be able to step in and make a difference? Right. So, as we've mentioned, May is Stop the Bleed month. There was a lot packed into that interview with Patrick. So we're going to turn this into a 2-part episode. So next, we're kind of throwing out an extra episode this month because of it being Stop the Bleed month, and really wanted to give this topic the full attention that it deserves. So we're going to be running some of the rest of his interview next week. So next Monday, we'll be talking about some other things. Specifically, how can you and I and all of us get involved? How can we get trained, and how can we learn what to do if a situation happens?
Yeah. And for me, some of the time, you know, when I hear these kinds of things, some of the questions that we're going to answer for you guys, we're going to leave you with little cliffhangers. But what's involved in getting trained? Is it like a 3-week course? Do I have to fly somewhere to get this training that is specialized? Is it expensive for me to get this training and this know-how? All of those questions will be answered in the very next episode, which will be next Monday. So hopefully you guys can stay tuned. Be looking forward to that. And please get involved in Stop the Bleed Month and Stop the Bleed Day, which just means talking about it. Increasing the awareness for this. All of us are force multipliers for this project and this campaign. Talk to others about it. Ask, hey, have you ever been trained to stop the bleed? What's involved in it, right? And we'd love to hear from you guys too. If any of our viewers or our listeners have been trained in Stop the Bleed, please reach out to us. We're gonna have a special gift for you because we want to show appreciation for you taking that proactive approach to maintaining your safety and the safety of those around you.
Yeah. And in fact, we're, as Wesley alluded to, we're going to be doing some giveaways.
Yeah.
So maybe here's something you can do. If you've taken a Stop the Bleed class, take a selfie with your certificate and send it to us. And then maybe we can post it and we'll send you a little giveaway. So we'll see what it is. But until then, there's homework. Wesley, give them the homework.
Yeah, there's always homework, folks. So we want you to like and subscribe to Disaster Class, right? We really appreciate when you guys watch each episode and share it with your friends and family. Leave us the 5-star rating, give us a thumbs up, comment on something that you've learned or something that you appreciated from this episode, please.
Yeah. And as always, you can reach out to us at disasterclass@instinctready.com. Or you can send us a message on our social media accounts at DisasterClass Podcast, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, LinkedIn, all those places. And be sure to check us out on wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure that you follow us. So thank you all for tuning in to Disaster Class. Stay educated.
Stay prepared.
Stay equipped.
All right, guys. Class dismissed. Get out of here. This episode of Disaster Class was sponsored in part by Sawyer Products, EM Disaster Gaming, Stop the Bleed Coalition, and Blue Lotus Virtual Services. This episode was hosted by Jason Perez, Jason Martin, and Wesley Long, with a special appearance by Patrick O'Neill. Disaster Class is directed, produced, and edited by Jason Perez. Copyright 2025, Instinct Ready Incorporated, all rights reserved.